Okay, let's get this kicked off. How's everyone doing tonight? Made it to Wednesday, short week. Hopefully not killing you too much with the database. Good news is tonight that we are actually going to take a little break from code. We might get back to code towards the end of the evening, but going to watch some videos on database design and learn a software called diagrams.net and creating our first entity relationship diagram. But before we get to that, what did we cover yesterday? We started using sqlize. What is sqlize? There are three letters that wrap up sqlize. It is a package that allows us to interact with SQL. Does anyone remember what kind of package it is or what it's doing? It is an ORM, or an object relational mapper. And so I think it's important just I'm realizing I probably didn't break that down yesterday of like, all right, it's an ORM, like, so what? An object relational mapper, like, what do those words mean, right? And the idea here is that it is mapping. So it is taking our SQL data, and the process of a map, whenever you map something, is to take that data and transform it into something else, right? So if you think about whenever you're in your React code and you use .map, you're looping over it. You may be changing that data or putting it in an LI tag, or starting to write out the HTML for it, and then whatever gets returned is the result of the map. Same thing goes for our ORM. Our ORM is taking our SQL data and mapping that into an object for us. And it is tracking the relationship between the object and the data over in our SQL. And so that is why it is a two-way street, right? We can both have our object come in and map our data from SQL over to the object. But when we use that magical .save function, it reversed the map. It took our object, put that into a SQL command for us, and ran that update or delete or insert SQL query. And so that is really breaking down the object relational mapper, is that it is mapping our SQL data over to an object and keeping track of that relation. So when we want to reverse it and take our object and put it back into SQL, we can. So hopefully that makes a little bit more sense of when we talk about a object relational mapper, it is literally mapping it into the relational database. And going back and forth two ways. So, okay, what else did we learn maybe about sqlize? What did we have to do different? What was part of the magic of sqlize? Do you think you guys would ever use sqlize? Do you think you're hardcore SQL fans and you're going to write SQL to the day you die? How are we feeling about that? Okay. We will be using the ORM more, whether you want to or not. I will make you fall in love with the ORM, I promise.
Hey Max, I felt like the find all.
Yep.
I felt like that was new. And then didn't we use find one for one instance?
Yes, we did. So the find one in SQL land is basically the equivalent of saying limit one. And so the benefit of using the find one is that instead of returning an array, it is returning just the one object we are looking for. And the reason we can do that is because when we structure our query properly, and we query on something like a primary key where we know that's never going to repeat, it makes us more confident that we can run a find one and know that only one thing is going to come back, right? We know that there is not going to be two different messages with an ID of one, because the database isn't going to let that happen, let alone us being able to query it and get multiple results back. So the closest thing that you can think of on that is Karen, hold off on any of those links, by the way. I have a message written up already, ready to send. So the find one is returning that object. And so you can think about that back when we go back to our vanilla JavaScript operating with the DOM, right? So when we want to access an ID, because we know that ID is unique on a div or is not going to be used, when we get that result back, it's just that object that we can interact with and update the inner HTML and all of that stuff. But when we use that document.get elements by class name, they're all coming back in an array, and then we have to loop through the array or pull apart pieces of the array. The same goes for our data. We can achieve everything that we want to with just a find all query, where we're going to get multiple results back, but because we're getting multiple results back, it's going to be in an array. And so we would have to update that array, manipulate it, loop through it, and then we would be able to save and all of that. So basically what we're saying is if we know we are only going to get one result back, let's not mess around with an array because we know we're only going to get one thing. Let's just use our find one. But if there is the potential for multiple results to come back, we want to use our find all because then it's going to return our objects in an array, and then we can loop over that and deal with those objects. Probably a long-winded explanation, but anything else? There's probably things in chat that I missed. What was the new thing that we had to create in order for the ORM to know how to interact with the database? What was that called? That was the model. You got it, Carolyn. And so basically we need to tell the ORM, hey, our database is set up this way or is going to be set up this way. So when you are doing that mapping to and from objects, just have a heads up of this is how you're going to translate it. This is how you know what's going to be in the object. This is how you know what the columns are going to be in the database. This is how that's going to work. Latonia, you brought up documenting. Documenting is definitely a good thing to get practice on. As of today, I mean, as of this weekend, when I was fully prepped for this entire week, I kind of mapped out the next couple days and how we are going to proceed with the database. So today we're going to talk about our entity relationship diagrams and create an ERD for our messages app. Your weekend homework will be creating an entity relationship diagram from business requirements. And so we will talk a little bit about business requirements and how they differ from one engineer telling another engineer, okay, hey, here's what you need to do. So that will be part of your weekend homework. And then depending on how long today goes and Mongo goes tomorrow, we are actually going to build out an entire application using the ORM, using the database, using the ERD that you guys are going to do for homework, we're going to go take it all the way back to wireframing and actually build up a wireframe. We're going to build out an entire front end using React, using Bootstrap, and we are going to take this entire business case of, hey, a appliance repair shop needs an app to track things. Here's all the things this appliance repair shop does. Just go build an app for me, right? And at the beginning, you go, well, like this feels pretty databasey. We're tracking data, and that makes sense. But like, all right, we're full stack developers now. We should be able to create this from start to finish. And so that's what we're going to do is we're going to dive in, start looking at the business requirements and start figuring out how we can make an app from start to finish, going all the way back to module 1 and starting to string things together all the way up until what we are covering today. So that will be the goal for next week. I'm not quite sure how long it's going to take us. But today we're doing our entity relationship diagrams. Tomorrow we will dive into a little example of Mongo, just so you guys are exposed to a different kind of database. And then we are going to get going on the appliance shop. app. And then after that, we're going to go all the way back to our e-commerce site that Joey had you guys working on. And we are going to add some backend functionality to the e-commerce site. I would say in less than 7 weeks, I think you guys are qualified full stack developers now. There are some additional modules after this that are good, valuable things to know, like DevOps of, all right, now I wrote my code. How do I get my code out on the internet? And security, which obviously we are hearing about all of the cybersecurity leaks and malware issues and all of that stuff. So I think those are definitely important modules for you guys to kind of have in your back pocket as a full stack developer, and also to possibly consider as a different career path, right? Because there are definitely standalone careers in cybersecurity and in DevOps as well. And so part of the beauty of this program is not that we, kick you out the door and go, all right, you're a full stack developer, stay in your lane and go get a job. There are definitely graduates that came out of this that went, oh, I want to go into technical project management because the whole idea of keeping track of where the team is at is something that is interesting to me. The database is where I want to be. I know we only spent 2 weeks on it, but I really like SQL. I really like this database design. That's where I want to go. So as I was gathering resources today, last weekend, on what I was going to cover, I played a cruel trick on Ariel and sent her a video. And I said, hey, can you just watch this thing? It shouldn't take you long, and let me know what your feedback is. Well, it was an 8-hour video Free Code Camp had put out. And so I will share that with you guys, not expecting you to watch it, but as another resource. So the Stanford courses are a really interesting thing for database design that you can go pursue. That's one thing. We are going to touch on Mongo a little bit more tomorrow. If Mongo is something you are interested in, there are a lot of resources out there, just a different way of designing your data, a different way about thinking about how you shove your data in the database. But if you are a fan of JSON and not of SQL, you are going to love Mongo. So same concepts, different database, different way of storing data. And then the third resources I am about to share in the CIC student resources channel. There is a 3-hour course on UML, which stands for Unified Modeling Language. It is basically what powers entity relationship diagrams. It kind of tells you about what all the shapes are and what you need to know about that. And then the second video is an 8-hour long video that is a deeper dive on database design of like, but why are you doing that, right? And so my goal tonight is to get you to the point where you can design a database without having to know all the individual conceptual ideas of like, here's the rule of why we put this here. Okay, here's another rule of why we don't put this here. If you guys find this interesting, that 8-hour video is a great resource. And if you like someone lecturing at you and you find that you learn best from a lecture, that is ideal for you because it is literally a guy at a chalkboard just writing things out and going at it. Everyone learns differently. If you like theories and learning concepts and are thinking that you are going to dive into the database as where you would like to focus, that is definitely worth your time, both the 3-hour video and the 8-hour video. So my goal is to take the 8 hours of database design that you guys would get from that video and shrink it into just tonight. And so that is what we are going to dive into. Fortunately, I found 2 very good videos on how we use software to create an entity relationship diagram and talking a little bit about that. So let me take a breath and let anyone ask questions.
I have one.
Shoot.
Wait, let me, Carolyn just posted something. Okay. So it's related, but it's kind of kind of a tangent. Is there a list of everything we've touched in our journey to full stack development? Do you know what I mean? Like, okay.
There is a really great resource that I stumbled on today when I was thinking about, oh, did I cover everything that I was supposed to cover in the curriculum? And there is an awesome map that I want to say either Jesse or Dana created. I'm going to share it in the student resources channel. Let me know if you guys can see that, or if you can't see it, let me know and I can share it a different way. It will load in and be very tiny, but there is a little zoom tool. So if you click on the zoom tool and then click on where you want to zoom in, that will show you all the different concepts and kind of what we were supposed to cover in that module and what the module name was and kind of all of that stuff. So one thing to note here, we changed the modules around. We did 2 changes since this has been updated. We moved React in front of the database, and then we split out the database and Node and kind of intertwined those. And so a couple different changes there, but hopefully that is the high level objectives of what we covered if you are a visual person. And the other thing that I can share with you is our curriculum is fully public. That doesn't mean that this file has actually been shared with everyone. So let me... Google has been running slow all day and it is killing me. I'm also going to share that curriculum document. And so that is a longer document. You've got 9-ish pages on that. But hopefully that should line up pretty well with that. They call it a drawing, I think, or a diagram. What's Google call that? A drawing. So the drawing with the flow chart of everything we are covering. Hopefully that is useful. And there's one more that I want to share with you. There is a really cool website called roadmap.sh, which is actually where I think Jesse drew a lot of inspiration from for the one that he made for our program. And hopefully this gives you an idea of like, all right, there was this concept that got mentioned. Where does that fit into this whole like developer idea? And so the roadmap.sh, again, is not a careers in code specific diagram or document or anything like that. But hopefully it gives you an idea of like, hey, I heard of this competitor or this other alternative. Where does that fit into this bigger picture? And so hopefully those are helpful for you. And yes, that zoom tool is definitely critical on that diagram because otherwise it is quite long to see all at once. Latonia, is that helpful? Does that answer questions? I'm sure that's helpful to a couple other students as well. So yeah, go ahead and scroll up to the links that I shared at 5:47 in the CIC student resources channel. I believe Karen also already sent them in the Zoom chat. We are going to use that. I shared the 2 individual videos with you guys, but the one we're actually going to use is that sync-tube.de/rooms. This is me getting creative around getting around YouTube copyright because we don't want to use someone else's videos in our video that's being live streamed to YouTube. But at the same time, I wanted to be able to pause it, interrupt it, and be able to talk over it. So in theory, if you guys all open up that sync-tube.de, You should see entity relationship diagram tutorial part 1. I'll dump that in the Zoom chat as well. And the idea behind this, I can see 8 of you guys popping in, is that I can control when the video plays or pauses, but the audio is still going to come out of your guys' computer. So if you are not muted, I think everyone is already muted in Zoom, so we should be good to go there. So I'm going to kick off this video, and then when I have some commentary to add, I'm going to hit the pause button, and in theory, it will pause on all of your computers as well. Newfangled technology, which never works well, especially in groups, but we're going to give it a try anyway. Any other questions before we dive into entity relationship diagrams?
I did have a question about something from yesterday, but I can wait till the end of class if you want. We can start.
No, go for it.
Okay. I was a little confused by the syntax when we import our message. I can kind of dump it in the chat, actually, if that's helpful.
Yep.
People. So it looks like require is taking 2 parameters in separate parentheses. Like, I was just a little confused by that and why you wouldn't put the file path and then comma DB, and why do you have it in separate parentheses like that? What is that?
Yep. Good. Very good
working?
question. Let me pull up some code.
Unmute yourself, Max. Nobody can hear you.
I thought I clicked that mute button. Thank you. So in our require, you know what? I'm realizing this is, give me 1 second. I think, yep, I'm sharing the wrong one. Sorry. I was sharing the code that I reference as I do for prep instead of the code we actually wrote in class. I mean, no, I'm a master developer and can do all of this off the top of my head. Day 1 share. Okay, this is probably a little bit closer to what we actually did. Okay, so over in our server JS, we have our const message. We require message DB, and so up until this point, nothing should jump out of the ordinary for us, right? Like, all right, we're requiring in from a file just like we did in from the database. And so the only difference is we use a named export in the database file, and we use the default export in line 11. And we know it's the default export because there are no curly braces here. So basically, whatever this module.exports is equal to is what is going to come into our message. Well, here's the kind of weird thing. That require would work fine here with the message, but if you look at our actual message, it doesn't equal this object. It actually equals a function. And that function is taking a parameter of database and then returning out this db.define thing. And so what we did is we actually chained our functions. We pulled in our require here, which gave us the whole function. And then we took our DB, dumped it into the function, and that returned out our DB define. And so I kind of got a little tricky there because we need access to our database over in our model in order for the database to know, like, hey, we're defining this in. But the problem is we don't have access to the DB until we pull in our DB and do our DB authenticate and open up the connection and all of that stuff. So what may make this a little bit more clear is we could call this const message to set up is equal to our require models message. And what that is going to be equal to is our function. And so then we could actually say our const message for real is equal to our message to set up and pass in the database. And then we would use message for real instead of our const message. So instead of doing this in two separate, instead of doing this in two separate steps of requiring the message, taking that message that we passed in, passing in the database, and finally getting out this thing that gets returned, I just chained two functions together. So I just said, hey, go require the file, but oh, by the way, that file's returning out a function. So when that function comes back, go ahead and pass in the database, and then whatever comes out of that function is going to go into the message. So that's a little bit more complicated. And actually, one of the reasons why Gus was so opposed to using sqlize is because getting the file set up and the models in the right place and the requires working and passing the database around and all of that stuff, it is a little messy. And so that is one of the reasons why I prepped this code last night or a couple nights ago before we went through it, was because I wanted to make sure that our requires were working, that we were able to pass around the independent files and get it all set up, right? Because there were 25 steps on that document last night, and probably 5 of them were around, at least 5 of them were around just getting our first model set up and connected to the database and everything flowing in the right order, right? Because obviously order matters here. We can't really get our model set up unless we're connected to the database. And then we can't use our models to query the database until we're connected to the database. And we need our database to know what the models are so the right tables can be created. And so you could argue that it made it a lot more complicated, splitting it out into the 3 separate files. But you can also see how much cleaner it is saying, all right, the table structure goes over here in the model. db.js is responsible for connecting to the database and setting up those models so the database knows about them. And then our server.js is just going to cherry pick from them and go, oh, let me pull out my database. Oh, let me pull out the models that I need. And then, okay, let's run with them. Hopefully that was helpful and answered the question. Cool. Yeah, I tend to gloss over the more complicated things in an effort to hopefully not confuse, but at the same time, it's like, I keep on hammering home, like we not only want to understand what code to write, but why we're writing the code that way and understanding what the code itself is doing, not just what we're typing in. So definitely continue to keep those questions coming because I'm happy to answer them until I tap out and go, that's too complicated for me. You got to ask another instructor about that. Cool. Any other questions? All right. I am going to switch over to our synctube.de link. Did anyone have troubles getting in there, or does not everyone sees the video of the guy with the white shirt? Cool. Scream bloody murder in the chat if something is not working, and we will go from there.
excuse me, Max. You had mentioned, it's Carolyn.
Go ahead.
The voice is floating down. You had mentioned that you can stop the video and stuff. I didn't know, are you going to actually start it, or are we supposed to just start it on our own computers?
Was it playing for anyone else?
It's just, it's ready to
I
play.
had to hit play. I figured out after a while that we were supposed to hit play because nobody was talking
Yeah.
anymore.
Son of
I
a, that's
wasn't-
not how
yeah,
it's
I
supposed to
wasn't
work.
sure. You're driving the bus or?
Okay, let me try. It's supposed to work that I can hit play and pause, and it's supposed to play and pause it on your videos as well. Let
What
me
I
try.
thought it said-
It paused it just now.
It
when
depends which
Carolyn asked
computer
the
I'm on, though. I'm on two
Okay.
computers and I'm only gonna watch it on one.
So you should only have the link open on one then, because it's gonna,
Right.
when
and
I
that's
hit play and
exact-
pause, it's gonna,
I
so
only
I'm gonna
have it
hit
open.
play here and let me know if it starts for you guys.
All right, so it's posted.
You can draw them out with pen and paper. but it's
Okay, where'd he go?
easier for you to use a diagram.
Oh, how annoying.
So going to pause it there. Lucidchart is a perfectly fine option. There is a program called diagrams.net, which used to be called draw.io, which used to be called, I'm blanking. It's literally changed names like 3 or 4 times in the past couple years. It is all based off of the same open source project called MX Graph. And Lucidchart just realized that they could charge money for it and add in some premium features. So Lucidchart is a fine option, and it is the free tier would definitely do all that we need it to. But diagrams.net doesn't really have a pricing model around all of their stuff, so that's why I prefer to use them. I've actually extensively used MX Graph at work. We built MX Graph into our own product, so we could build flowcharts over there as well. So you don't have to create a Lucidchart account. You can if you want, and there are free accounts, and I'm not going to stop you from doing that. But you will find that diagrams.net lines up exactly with what they are covering in Lucidchart, and that is because they are just based off of the same project. Ariel, did you get sound working?
No, I'm not sure. It started when you started the video and then it just completely went out.
Try
So
and
I don't know if
refresh.
it's like
Try and refresh the page and see if that helps.
And what timestamp did you stop it at? Because it was almost like I missed something.
127.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna start it back up. So to just go over that briefly, what he's saying is the name at the top of those rectangles are going to be our table names. Are the things in that right column right now are going to be all of our different columns that we are going to use. And then in a second, we're going to add a third column to this table where we specify the column type. And so the ERD it's optional to specify the column type, but it's also something that we can do. The thing that you guys probably are not familiar with is that thing over on the left side of the column, which is key. And we're going to talk a little bit about primary keys and foreign keys and how we can link those two together, which is going to set us up for good join tables down the road. Any other sync tube issues? Is it kind of working for people now? Okay, cool. Now, I always forget what all of these mean. And I'm sure at some point in my career I should have memorized them, but I always had a way to cheat on that. The most important two that you probably do want to memorize are the one and the many, and we're going to see how they play out. While I'm sure a proper ERD should have all of these and handle them as well, the only ones that I am going to be using tonight are the one and many, because the implications between one and then one and only one, there are very few implications in the database, especially in projects as small as we're working, where the slight nuances between one and only one, or 0 and 1, are not huge. We want to just focus on the one and many. But I am going to pull this cardinality, or basically the key of the diagram, into our ERD. So when we're creating it, we can remember what those symbols mean. They are standard though, so it doesn't matter what version of SQL you are using. Entity relationship diagrams are a agreed upon standard. And so one always means one, no matter what variation of SQL you are using. He said crow's foot. The only reason he's saying crow's foot is if you look at the arrow coming out, and then the line that's going through the arrow, it literally looks like a foot. And so when you hear the word crow's foot, he's literally just talking about what the shape looks like. Because if you look at that many line, it literally looks like a foot. And so that's where that crow's foot terminology comes from. Okay, so that feature that you saw where it just magically generates the SQL for you, that is unfortunately a Postgres feature. I'm sorry, that is unfortunately a Lucidchart feature that is not built into diagrams.net. So that is the bad news. The good news is we don't actually need to run that because we're going to be using sqlize for our models, and our diagrams.net or Lucidchart doesn't support sqlize, so it's not a big deal that it's not generating the SQL for us. So it's definitely a nice feature, but because we're using sqlize, we don't need to worry about it too much. We're basically relying on sqlize magic instead of relying on Lucidchart magic.
Quick question, Max. Oh, I'm sorry, you weren't done yet.
Nope, go ahead.
When I took the database class back in 1990, whatever it was, the diagrams we did, I used to get confused thinking they were flowcharts because we used circles, ovals, you know, the caution shape and everything. Are those used anymore, or are they doing like in this one, just the rectangles?
So what you were talking about is probably called, give me 1 second.
It's an ER diagram. That's how we were taught.
I've got another acronym in my head. Give me 1 second. A DFD, or a data flow diagram.
No, it wasn't a flow chart, but I got confused because of the shapes we used. But no, it was an ER diagram.
Something like that look familiar?
Little bit. There was more geometry involved to help you see it.
So that you were probably still using that UML, which is the unified markup for making a flow chart. But this basic idea of we've got to understand how the business works before we can design a database around the business. And so that's when you get into the flow chart, right? Of like, all right, what happens when we pass things from one person to another person? What data gets passed?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, but that wasn't what this was. This was the database design, and we used different shapes. So maybe that's just because it was like in 1990, whatever it was, 6.
Entity relationship diagrams have been around for a long time, and they all use this standardized symbols. I've never seen an ERD that does not use this.
Yeah.
And when I first learned this, my professor was in the industry for many years. And he was like, no, this is the way it's done because everyone uses that UML design language.
Yeah.
And so it is pretty standardized.
Okay, maybe he was just letting us be creative then.
What was the name that you called it? Did you say Sinclair or something like that?
No, ER diagrams.
Oh, I thought you mentioned a different name. No, the entity relationship diagrams are all pretty standardized.
Yeah, it was with Professor Audie. He's passed away since, but he was okay. That's weird because but it doesn't matter. If they don't use them, they don't use them. So we won't. Sorry.
No problem.
Thank you.
Latonia, I saw your message about the sound being low. I was wondering if that was just on my side, and apparently it isn't.
No, I actually never got the audio fixed. I was watching it on regular YouTube, and I thought it was just me. So I don't know if Latonia has an issue.
Yeah, if the audio is a problem, go ahead and switch over to. You were able to adjust it at the bottom of the video. Oh, okay. In the bottom left, thank you for that. Brielle. In the bottom left, there's the play button, but there should also be a little sound thing, and then you can slide that up, and that should turn the volume up. I don't know if me turning it up just turned it up for all of you guys, or if you just have to turn it up manually. Okay. We are going to move on to the next video unless anyone has questions. Cool. It should just automatically do the right thing. but let's see. Any questions on the primary key? So we rely on our database to generate the primary key, and I will have a couple things to say once he hits an upcoming point in the video. Okay. So obviously, because there's a lot of debate, I'm obviously going to weigh in of what my opinion is. It is pretty common to put an ID on every table. I would say, I think out of the 40 different tables we have in our database at work, I think I use a composite key in maybe one of them. And only because I was feeling feisty that day and didn't feel like creating an ID. It is pretty uncommon, at least in databases that I have worked in, to not have an ID on every single table. And when we do our designs tonight, you will see the ID is the very first thing that I add to every single table, so that we have a consistent thing that we can use as a foreign key in other tables. So we will definitely talk about that tonight and start getting experience of like, all right, this is all great, but he's magically like dragging things out from the side and it's got all the column names in it. Yeah, that magic doesn't actually exist. So we will be creating these from scratch tonight, but creating our requirements first so we know what we have to create in the entity relationship diagram. So back to the video. Now, what you could say there is, oh, well, you could put a product order date right on the product table, right? But then what happens when another customer orders the same product? Well, there's only one value that we can stick in a row, right? We can't list multiple values. If you think of a spreadsheet, it's like that cell is going to be one value. And if we need that, we need to duplicate the row. So you run into a problem of, well, I can't put order date on the product because that product's going to be ordered at multiple dates. And I can't put order date on the customer because if I put it on the customer, what if the customer orders multiple times? We'd have to wipe that out every time. And so that is when we use this bridge table, right? And he hit the nail on the head, and I really want to emphasize that. We should never have a many-to-many relationship in our database. In the real world, it makes sense to have many-to-many relationships. Many customers can order many products. That just makes sense. That is, we can't change the fact that a customer can order multiple things, right? So that's when we use this bridge table, and that's what he's about to talk about. Quick fun fact. Does anyone know why zip code is varchar and not a number? Anyone have a good guess? not the dash. Although we would need to make it a varchar if we were to, they have a thing called the zip +4, which is your 5-digit zip code and then a dash and 4 digits that show up after it. And it's essentially made to make the post office be able to separate your mail quicker and say, oh, everyone who's sharing the last 4 digits of the zip +4, that would all be on one mailman's route. Kyle, you got it. It is the 0 at the beginning. Zip codes can start with 0. So my zip code in Ocean City is 08226. I can't tell you how many applications I have used where I've typed in my zip code 08226 and it goes, your zip code is 8226. 4-digit zip codes are not valid. And we all went, no, my zip code is 08226. And it's like, no, we just truncated the 0 because zeros don't exist in numbers. And so that is why zip codes need to be it. And Kyle, you hit the nail on the head. For the same reason in Excel, Excel uses, it tries to intelligently guess data types. And if you are an Excel powered user, you know there are times you need to modify the data type to show up differently. It's why you probably have noticed when you type a date in Excel with slashes, it automatically converts it for you. That is Excel magic under the hood trying to guess what kind of data is in that column. It is also why you need to store social security numbers. Like if you're storing the last 4 of your social, you need to store that as text as well, because social security numbers can have leading zeros. And if you do not store it as text in the database, it will drop those off. I'm not sure that you can have a leading social security number that starts with a 0, but I do know the last 4 of the social definitely can start with a 0 because mine does. That's all I'm going to say on my social. Obviously, recording, sharing. Okay. All right, that's it. That's all I am cheating and not teaching from scratch tonight. Does anyone have questions? Okay, so what I want to do is I am going to switch over to a new Google Drive doc and share it with you guys. And we are going to think through all of the requirements a chat room app would have. So I know we've already done like a really basic messaging app, but we didn't really get into the who's sending the message and you know, can a user be in multiple rooms and all of that kind of stuff. So I am going to share this. I am going to call it chat room app requirements. I'm going to change it so anyone with the link can see it. I'm going to drop that in pasted. I'll drop it in the resources channel in case you want to reference it later. I'm going to drop it in the Zoom chat. Carolyn, I noticed that as well. The A key or the AK, I've never seen that. I'm guessing it's an automatic key. The only other key type that I can think of other than a primary key and a foreign key, which are by far the most two common types, is a UK or a unique key. And we use unique keys when we want to use both a foreign key. I'm sorry, when we want to use both a unique column and also have a different primary key. So for example, in our users table, we may want to generate a user ID because using IDs and numbers, while it's harder on us, it's much easier on the database to tie data together when we're using numbers instead of just using text. So when I create a users table, I'm still going to create a user ID and make that my primary key. With that said, I still want usernames to be unique. I don't want one user to be able to steal a username of a different user. And so it is possible to use a primary key to generate the user ID, which is what you're going to use in all of your tables to reference that primary key in the other table as the foreign key, but also still have uniqueness enforced, which is when we would use the unique key on the username column. With that said, if you would like to Google what an AK key is in a database, I'm sure you get an answer pretty quickly. I have not seen that before though, so it's either buried under dust in my ERD knowledge, or it's something specific that I never learned. Okay, you guys are in here, which is good. Karen, if you don't mind updating the resources list in Google Classroom with the individual YouTube links, you probably don't want to drop in the sync tube, and then also the link to this document, that would be appreciated. Okay, thinking about a chat room app, what are some requirements of a chat room? And we really want to get down to even the basics. So even if you think it's dumb to mention it, we still want to document it in here. And the reason we want to do that is because at some point in your career, you're going to have a client or a boss or a non-technical user come to you and go, I want my app. Oh, I can share the screen too. I want my app to do things. And you're like, okay, tell me what you want your app to do. And the user is going to give you a list of 10 different things. And you're going to be building those 10 different things and think of 5 other things they didn't mention, but you know they're going to want. And you're going to build that in the app and you're going to give them the app and they're going to go, well, why doesn't it do 16 through 20 different things that I mentioned? And you go, when did you mention it? I gave you this list of requirements. They're going to look at the list of requirements and go, well, yeah, but I clearly meant that it had to do this because I said this. Right. And so that's the beauty of communication here, is that they are going to just throw things at you. And the point of the requirements document is not to build out your tasks or figure out what order you're going to do them. It's just to get everything out of the users or the clients or whoever's giving you this app's head. Right. And so this is a two-way communication process. It's not just a matter of hearing everything they're saying and dumping it in. It's a matter of when they're asking the questions, to when they're giving you the requirements for you to ask questions and make sure you understand all of that. With that said, we want to make this as basic of a chat room app as possible. Right. So Latonia, features like geolocation, encryption, maybe a save feature, like all things that we would want to build in. And as a requirements doc, if you were saying those things to me as a client, I would explain the notion of a minimum viable product and say, I can definitely build all of those things in for you. And this is something that I tell my boss all the time. It is never a question of if I can build it. It is a question of how long is it going to take me to build it, and is that acceptable to you in the time frame? You can ask me to build a video game, and I'm going to tell you I absolutely can build a video game. Have I ever built a video game in my life? No. Do I know how a physics engine works, or how you can move around a character, or how you have a map, or any of that? No idea. Can I go learn it? Yes. Is it going to take me 3 years to build this video game? Probably, but I can do it. And so that is why I always try and break my clients of saying, can you, and trying to train them to say, how long would it take you to, and then put whatever they are putting in there. And so because we want to scope this down as small as possible, we're going to think about the smallest number of possible features that we can have in this. Notice I'm calling this a chat room app and not a messaging app, because I specifically want the ability to go into different rooms. So think about this more like Slack than a text message, right? That there are different rooms that you can be in, and based off of what room you're in, you're going to see those messages. Some form of encryption, we're not going to worry too much about that when we deploy this app. If we were putting it out on the public internet, yes, we would definitely want some level of encryption. We would also want the ability to sign in. And so let's start there. User needs to be able to sign in. And now as a developer, we're going to add some notes to that. Now, the client may not care about this, but we want to specify this early on, because what if the client expected you to sign in with a username and you just thought, oh, they're going to use their emails as their usernames because that's what you do on other sites. So when we think about the user needs to be able to sign in, well, they're going to need a username and a password. Okay, that's a good start. They sign in, they have a username and password. What else does the user need to be able to do? We're going to skip over email just because we're using the username instead. But it is entirely possible that in addition to the user information itself, we would also have a profile set up where they could upload a profile picture or set their name or whatever it is. But we're going to kind of skip over all the profile features, think MVP, and go, we can use a username for that. Latonia, you hit the nail on the head. They need to be able to pick which rooms they are in, right? There are multiple rooms. In order to be able to pick which rooms they're in, what's the caveat of that? Before they can pick what rooms they're in, they probably need to be able to in order to join a room, you got it, to be able to create rooms or create groups. So we also need the ability to create a room. I'm just going to use the word room. Groups interchangeable, doesn't really matter here. Okay, so they can pick which rooms they are in. They can create a room. What else do they need to be able to do? Block feature, I would argue, probably isn't MVP, but think even more basic. They need to be able to input text and send a message. Okay, if we are inputting a message and send it, we probably need to actually break that down into all CRUD operations on a message. And you know what? We're realizing picking it is probably reading the room, and creating it is also the creation. So let's just simplify this into room CRUD and join. Well, let's say join room. And then all right, in addition to being able to join the room, we probably need to be able to switch between rooms. And when I say CRUD, I'm just going to throw this in here as create, read, update, and delete, just in case you forgot what CRUD stands for. All right. Latonia, you mentioned log out. Let's throw that up there at the top. All right. Is there anything in the MVP when you're thinking about like the most basic chat room you can think of? Is there anything else that the user would probably be able to do? The alert noise, yes, I would argue that's MVP, but for the sake of class, I'm gonna cut that out, only because that's very technical to pull off. We'll throw it in here as features to add soon, and we'll say ability to see new message. And I will think about how we can pull that off without going down a rabbit hole. I think blocking and unmuting I think are not MVP. I think they're all good features, but I don't think we need it for the absolute most basic bare bones app we can create. And Dominique, add a friend, I would argue is crucial. But because we can manage that list with what rooms they're in, we don't really need to know about friends. It's just if you're in the room, you can assume they're going to be your friend or someone you want to talk to. We're going back into like old school chat room apps. So less direct messaging and more just sending messages into rooms. So this is actually, I think, as basic of a requirement document as we need. There is a business case that will post into Google Classroom at 7:30, which is going to be your homework tonight. So your homework tonight is going to just be a brain dump from some business owner who runs an appliance repair shop. And he knows he wants an app, but all he can tell you is about how his shop runs right now and what kind of data he knows he has. And your whole job is going to be pulling apart this business use case into a entity relationship diagram. So the requirements in an ERD are kind of overlapping, right? Our requirements definition can help us extract from the client what features we need, but the entity relationship diagram is more into the engineering side, right? It's saying what does our database need to look like? Because the client at the end of the day doesn't care what the database looks like as long as they know that their data is getting stored in it. And so they don't care if you have tables or one-to-many relationships or any of that stuff. But at the same time, proper data structure, definitely very important, because otherwise your database is going to have duplicated information in two different places. You know, what happens when I update this in one place? Does it update everywhere else? All kinds of problems that can spin out of that. So I am going to go to diagrams.net. Totally up to you guys if you want to follow along with me. I will say that this is not a homework assignment. You do not have to turn in the entity relationship diagram that we are creating in class tonight for the chat app, but you will have to turn in a entity relationship diagram for the appliance business case that we are working with. And as always with all homework, that is not due until Sunday at 11:59 p.m. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to diagrams.net and I'm just going to hit that start button. They do have a downloadable version if you prefer to not work in a web browser and prefer to work in like a separate application. Same functionality across the both of them. I'm just going to work in the web browser. Doesn't really matter. And I know we're coming up on break time, so I just want to get everyone with their first entity in their ERD, and then we will take a break. So I'm going to hit create a new diagram, and it's going to say untitled diagram. I am a huge fan of naming all of your files before you put anything in the file. So I am going to call this chat room app ERD. And you notice they're all different kinds of flowcharts in here. There's something called Kanban, which is a very popular way of doing project management. We see some flowcharts in here of like, all right, what's the business process look like? How do we move data around? But the one that we want is obviously the entity relationship diagram. So I'm going to pick that one and I'm going to hit create. And then it's going to say, where do you want to create it? So I'm actually going to stick this right in my my code folder. I see my code module 8, week 2, day 2, which I know is confusing because we're on Wednesday, but short week. And then it oddly did not bring the name of my file over. So I'm going to type that in again. I'm going to say chat room app ERD. I'm going to hit save. And I am into this thing with customers and orders and shipments. All right, well, that's just kind of getting us started. That's not what we want. Let me take a quick break and see if anyone has questions or is stuck on diagrams.net or getting to the point where you have a diagram showing up. I will say that's the last thing you have to do to follow along with me tonight. Just make sure that you can get into diagrams.net and create a new file. And then for the rest of our messages, ERD creation, you don't have to follow along step by step. And I will share the link in the chat room in case anyone needs it. If you got it going, go ahead and take your break. We'll loop back and be here at 7:15. And I'll stick around for the next couple minutes in case anyone has any diagrams.net problems. Otherwise, see you at 7:15. to carry on the conversation from the chat, you really do not want to get someone started about Wawa who lives in the Philadelphia, New York, New Jersey, Maryland area, I think Virginia as well. It is like, it's a cult following, and they're, you know, they're gas station convenience stores essentially. But it is, I know driving from Syracuse down here, what time I have to leave Syracuse to make it to Wawa in the Pocono area in order to make it in time for breakfast. So that was always my leaving time from Syracuse, was I just have to make it to Wawa by breakfast in the Poconos, which happens to be the closest Wawa to Syracuse. Anywho, anyone have any questions after break? After they had their break? I swear the coffee will make it up to my brain momentarily. Okay. I'm gonna switch back to my screen share here. Okay, so I'm gonna pull up my requirements just so I have them on screen somewhere. All right, so we've got customer orders and shipments. None of those are particularly helpful, and I want to start from scratch anyway. So I am going to delete those out. I'm going to end the poll just in case that is in your guys' way. When the poll is running like it is now, is that in your way, or is that like just another window that you can close out of? I'm getting yeses and nos.
It's in the way, but once you vote on it, it's totally gone.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, I'm going to end it just so it's not in anyone's way. Okay. So you may be in here and you're like, all right, there's like a lot going on here. Let's take a step back. Over on the left, we've got all of our shapes, and these are general shapes that you can use to make any kind of diagram, any kind of flow chart. And you'll notice down at the bottom here, you can open up more shapes, and there are all kinds of categories in here to denote Amazon Web Services, to denote different products like Google Cloud Platform, to go through things like mockups, which some people do right in diagrams.net, to even pull in Bootstrap components like we had over in that we've used before. But what we are going to focus on is our entity relationship diagram. I don't have to add anything in more shapes though, because we picked the ERD file type. When I pop open my shapes here, you'll see there are all kinds of things for us to use. So what we are going to do is we're going to grab a table and we're going to pull it out. Okay. Now in our table, what do you think our first table is going to be? Users. Sure, why not? That's actually a loaded question. It can actually be 3 different things. We could start pretty much anywhere in our entity relationship diagram. Users is normally a good place to start because I can't remember the last time I've worked in a database that did not have a users table. Theoretically, it's totally possible, right? It's not like a requirement of the database to have a users table, but whenever you are building an application, there are users of that application, and you want to be able to track them and what they're doing, what messages they're sending, what room they're in, all of that stuff. So it makes sense most of the time to start with a users table, often because that primary key is going to get used over and over again. Dominique, just to call you out for a second, excuse me, we're not going to use products because we are building this for the chat room app. So the appliance repair case, that may have a products, but that will post in 10 minutes. So you'll see that in a minute. Okay, so in here, we're going to start with our users table. And they've already added a primary key for us. Why? Because every table should absolutely have a primary key. It doesn't matter if that primary key is a composite key that you are using multiple different columns to pull that key together. But because I mentioned before in that debate of do you even need a composite key, I like putting a ID on every single thing that we create. So I am going to call our primary key user ID. Now, in typing that alone, I sparked another debate of, is it ID capital I lowercase d, or is it capital I capital D? You know me, I am Mr. Camel Case. I am Camel Case and everything. I am Mr. Never use dashes, never use underscores. And for whatever reason, I break that rule with ID, and I always use capital I capital D. So you'll see in my code, I consistently use that. And that is a battle that has been raging on, I would normally say, since the beginning of time, but since the beginning of databases became popular in the 1970s. Is ID all capitalized? Is it all lowercase, or is it capital I capital D? Like I said, I'm in the camp of I always do capital I capital D. It's up to you. And I'm actually going to lowercase the U because all of the column names that I use are lowercase. I am sure there is a standard that I am breaking somewhere, but I'm going to kind of just roll with it the way I do it, knowing that our entity relationship diagram is eventually going to be implemented in sqlize. And sqlize likes to follow camel case because it's all JavaScript. Okay, so we've got our user ID. Now, thinking back to our requirements doc here, we actually already started throwing in some things that we need in our users table. So let's switch back to our ERD. What are some things we need in our users table? Password and username. Okay. And we don't really need anything else in here. User ID, we have username, password. So I'm going to delete out row 3. Let me delete out that whole row. Maybe not. Okay, that's fine. Okay, so we've got our username, we've got our password, we've got our user. We're actually rocking and rolling here. And by the way, you can collapse this if you're looking at too much information all at once, just to kind of shrink things down, see what only what you need to. What kind of data type is username going to be? It is going to be text, but we are varchar area, Ariel, you're on the right track. Because we know where this destination is going to go. We know that this is going to be end up in sqlize. So what we want to do is we want to use data types that sqlize supports. And so there will be variants in an ERD where you'll pick it up and be like, what is string? I've never heard of string before, because it may be something for sqlize as opposed to varchar, which is what Postgres would use. So in order to refamiliarize ourselves, I'm going to pull up the sqlize docs, jump into version 6, jump over into our, do a search for data types, without a space. And this isn't the list that I wanted. Never mind. I think it is in model basics and data types. That's the list that I wanted. Okay, so these are the things that that sqlize supports out of the box. And so these are the ones that we're going to roll with. So we're going to grab a string from there, and we are going to throw it in here, and we're going to say string. And you know what? Let's do it all in caps because sqlize does it all in caps, which should hopefully make it stand out. Password. Same thing. We're going to use the string. And again, varchar is what Postgres is using under the hood, but sqlize is just taking the string and actually making it a varchar for us. So the only reason we're not saying varchar itself is because sqlize calls that a string, and then depending on what kind of database sqlize is connecting to, in our case Postgres, it's going to automatically convert that into a varchar or whatever the correct thing for that database. So whenever we're picking our data types, we're going to pick from this list. Kyle, great question. What about user ID? Yeah, we definitely should specify that that is going to be an int. And if we look over here, it's not going to be a float or a double or anything like that, because it's going to be always be a whole number. So we're going to specify our user ID as an integer. Okay, that is, I believe, all we need for the users table. Now, it is entirely possible that we will be designing some other data and we'll need to go back and add more columns to this. But it is so much easier to add more columns in our ERD than it is to create all of our database models and then go, oh, crap, I actually need another column in there, or, oh, that column shouldn't be in that table. It should be in this other table over here. And you run into that a lot with the bridge tables of like, you think you can just shove something in there and then you go, that's a many-to-many relationship. That's not a good idea. We need a bridge table. Carolyn, the user ID is going to be generated by us. So the user doesn't get to pick what their ID is. That's going to be generated by the database. And so because we're using Postgres, it will never contain alpha characters. Okay, we've got our users table. What table do we need next? And I say next, but I mean, what's another table that we need? All right, rooms, first one I saw, so we're rolling with that. So I'm going to pull another one out here. I'm going to say it is rooms. And what am I going to make my primary key? Going to make it my room ID. And I'm going to keep with my naming convention. I'll do a capital I, capital D. The version that you use is always the singular, because we are talking about one single room in this case, right? This entity, there's going to be a username and password for every single user, which is why it is a user ID and not a user's ID. But you notice the entity or the table name is plural because we obviously are going to have multiple users. Okay. And our room ID, IDs are almost always integers in sqlize. All right, for our room, what information do we need to store about our room? We're gonna foreign key to users. We'll get to that in 1 second, Shaw. The name of the room, and the name of the room is going to be another string. It's pretty much all we need, right? Except obviously the, show you throughout the date. So we'll say created at, and what data type is that going to be? Good question. I'm going to come back over to sqlize. I'm going to grab my date. And you'll see there are other options for date. So if you add in 6 in MySQL only, it supports fractional seconds. Don't really know why you would need fractional seconds. Or there is a date only. So if you wanted just the day that it was created as opposed to the date and the time, you could do date only. But because I just want a regular date with the time, I'm going to use that, and I'm going to say create it at date. That's the timestamp, Carolyn, is going to be our created at date. The timestamp format that we used in Postgres, sqlize, again, is going to realize that we want a date and automatically use the right data type over in Postgres. So these data types are only coming from sqlize. They're not talking about what it's actually going to be in the Postgres under the hood. Created at Latonia, what do you mean standard or preferred?
Did you just want to write it that way, or did you have to write it that way because it's in the documentation somewhere?
Nope, I created that. A lot of people would call that the timestamp field, which is fine to do. It is common to do a created at and an updated at. So whenever you make a change to the value in the database, you also store the time it was updated. So the created at time and the updated at time are always the same at the initial creation. And then if you go to edit it, the created at time obviously stays the same and the updated at time updates. But for now, we're just going to do our created at and say we don't care about the updated at. Okay. So what's the other obvious thing about rooms that we need? Shaw, you were kind of getting at it. Who is in the room? Right. So we're going to say users in room and users in room. I'm not quite sure what kind of data type that's going to be, but let's roll with it. So I'm going to actually import our entity relationship diagram key here, just so we can remember what the lines we're creating look like. Okay, so the users in the room has to tie to the user ID, right? That makes sense. So what I'm going to do is if I hover over this, you see how I get a little arrow? I can grab that arrow and drag it right to my users in the room. Okay, and because we're doing that, we're using a primary key in another table, which makes this a foreign key. Okay, and that arrow isn't really a float. That's more of a flowchart thing than an entity relationship diagram. So when we think about it, we go, okay, well, how many users can there be? Well, there can be many users, right? So we want to use just the regular arrow. So we are going to grab over here, give me a second. There it is. Okay, that's one of them. Okay, so the two drop downs over here on the left are showing you what the first arrow looks like over here, and then it's showing you this one, what it looks like over here. So if I change this to, I don't know, something unique to have the square, you see how the square appears on that end? And if I wanted the square to appear over here on this end, I would click and then go to this drop down instead of this drop down and grab something else and it would show up there. It's changing that line end. And so if I hold down Option and scroll in and out, that can zoom me in or out of my diagram. So I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. So we said that there can be many users in a room, correct? So we're going to grab our line and we're going to come down here and we are going to use our little crow's foot. We're going to say, all right, there are many users, but rooms there can also be many rooms as well. So I'm going to come in here and go, oh, well, there's many over here. There can be many users in a room and many users can be in a room. Well, hold on. That breaks a rule. What rule did it break? No many to many. Exactly. Shaw, we need another table. You said it exactly right. What kind of table do we need? Does anyone remember what he called that?
Latonya already said it.
The bridge table. Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to grab another entity. I'm going to drag it out here, and I'm going to call it users in room. Okay, and our users in room, technically, we're going to put a primary key on this just because I'm not going back on my word. I'm going to say user in room, and that is going to be an integer type. We're never actually going to use this primary key, but doesn't really hurt to create it. So we're going to create that. Now, what are the two pieces of information that we need in our users in the room? ID, what kind of ID, Latonia? We need our room ID and our user ID, and they are both going to be foreign keys, and we are going to link that to users and rooms. All right, whoa. A lot going on there. Let's break it down. We've got our user ID, and that is still going to be an integer because our user ID over here is an integer. We always want to match data types. And then we also need our room ID, and that is also an integer. Well, okay. Oh, did not mean to do that. Delete just row 3. Okay. Now I'm going to come in here and I am going to delete this line out. I'm going to scoot this up in line and I'm going to say, all right, where's my user ID coming from? That's coming from my user ID. Go ahead and connect that there. And because we're connecting it, that is going to be a foreign key. And then, hey, by the way, room ID, that is also a foreign key. So I'm going to grab that and connect it there and make that a foreign key. All right. Now, users in room, well, that doesn't make sense. We're not actually having a column here. We're tracking that all in this separate entity. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my users in room and just delete that out. Okay, now that we're here, let's think about this. There can be many users in a room. So this side of the line needs to have the many on it, right? But it can only be one user in the room over here, right? So there are many users over here. There's only one user over on the left. And so we're going to change our starting line to the line that looks like the single line. So we're basically saying there's one user over here, but they can be in many different rooms. So the many goes on this side because there are many users in a room, but there is only one user on the side that that line is connecting to. And then we're going to come over here and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to say, well, there can be many rooms that the user is in. So that line is going to stay as the many line here. But the room is, there's only one room that is going to be over in this table. Kyle, if you look in the line options, there are 5 drop downs and the 1 point value. If you grab that and go all the way down to the bottom, you'll see the fourth to last option should be your crow's foot. And so on this one, I'm going to change it and I'm going to say there is only going to be one room. Nope, I flipped that. There's going to only be one room, but the user can be in multiple rooms. And we're linking it right to the primary key because we know what the foreign key is going to be. Okay, so there's one more table that we probably need to support our requirements. And it's probably, ironically, the most obvious one. Diagrams.net just froze up on me. I'm going to start it again. Going to open an existing diagram. Okay, and everything is back. Reminder to save often, which is something that I realized I was not doing. Okay, what is, Latonia, you already beat me to it. We need the messages table. So I'm going to, oh, lucky me, I lost my shape types. Entity relationship, that's what I wanted. All right, I'm going to pull this over. I'm just going to throw it down here. Doesn't really matter, by the way. Okay, save changes. it doesn't really matter where you put your entities. The lines that connect them are the much more important thing. So it doesn't matter if I create my messages table and put it here or stick it over here. Doesn't really matter. The layout of your diagram isn't important. It's just the lines and the names in them that make sense. All right, well, we're already getting really good at creating our ID. So we're going to say message ID, and that is an integer. What are the other things that I need on my messages table? What are the other columns? Yep, whether it was received or not. And I'm going to grab my SQL documentation, and I want a Boolean for that. And under the hood, Postgres is using a tiny int of 1. A tiny int is just like a regular int, but you guessed it, smaller. So it can hold even less data than a regular integer can hold. The database can only hold numbers that are so big. And the same actually goes for JavaScript. There are numbers that are too big for JavaScript to hold on to, which is when we start using things like big int in Postgres. But that is not a problem that I have ever run into of storing too large of a number in my database, even though it is probably a somewhat common thing to run into. It's not common enough that I have run into it in my professional experience. But okay, we want a Boolean, right? Because that's going to handle whether it's received or not. Is it spelled out? It is. Okay. So we've got our received Boolean. We need what user sent the message. What else do we need? The room that it was sent in. Very good, Ariel. And this is when I'm going to figure out how I add more rows. No, I don't want to do that. Karen, off the top of your head, do you remember how we add more rows? We can copy and paste an existing row. The only reason why I don't want to do that is because it like detaches it from the table. So if I move this table, the room ID isn't going to move with it. So I don't want to be hacky. That's a Googleable thing. Diagrams.net add row to table. The table select a cell. Oh, it looks like we drag it out over from the side. Okay, so if we grab an item and drop it there. No. Grab an item and I don't like the way it's doing that. Oh, we grab it. No. Why do you hate me? All right,
Max,
we're gonna
Oh,
go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. I was gonna say I did it. I just lined it up. You saw when that blue line popped up, and then just like yep, and just move over.
But is it attached? If you move your messages table, does it move with you?
Hold on 1 second. Yep,
So
it's in there.
looking, when you look at the where on the left hand side where your entity relations are, it says row,
Yeah, it's like the third.
like right next to the second table,
Oh,
right
oh,
there.
oh, there it is. Thank
Yep.
you,
There you go.
guys.
Welcome.
So what we did is we grabbed row, which is so ridiculously tiny in the sidebar, you can't actually see it. So it's the third one over, and if you hover over it, you see where it says table row 1. That's how you know that's the one that you want. So what we did is we grabbed that, we dragged it over, and then the whole table turns like purplish blue. And then when we drop it, it actually does the right thing. Thank you for that assist there, guys. Okay, so the other thing that we said we needed was our room ID, which we added. The timestamp. So we'll call that sent time. And that is going to be, I was being bad, date, integer, and one more obvious thing that Kyle, you already beat me to, was the actual content of the message. And this is where we're going to break and not actually use a string, because strings are limited to 255 characters. So what we're actually going to use is text, because text is not limited to 255 characters. It can be as long as you want. And so we're just going to break that up a little bit. Notice my room name I left as a string, right? I don't really, if users are creating something that long, give me one. I don't actually want them to be able to create a room name that is longer than 255 characters. That's like over a sentence length, right? And same for their username. I don't want them to have a super long username. If their password's 255 characters, they're typing a freaking sentence in for their password. So we don't need anything particularly long there, but for the content, it is definitely possible that I'm writing a novel to send as a message. And so I'm going to let the users type as long as they need to. Text is the SQL data type, and it also happens to be a data type in Postgres as well. So a lot of the times they will overlap, and when you say text, it will actually use the text data type in Postgres. But there are times that it does not line up. For example, string is the data type in sqlize, but that's matching to a varchar in Postgres. So sometimes they line up, sometimes they don't. But the beauty of Postgres is we don't really have to care as long as we are using the right data types in sqlize. sqlize will take care of the Postgres data types for us. Okay. I'm gonna just shrink up my table here a little bit. What is the step that we forgot with our messages? Gotta link it all up. Or to use developers' favorite phrase, wire it all up. Wire it all up. You know what that means. You know, just why do we need to give you any more instructions? Just wire it all up. Okay. So received, does that need to be a foreign key? Does that need to be wired anywhere? Nope. User ID. Oh yeah, would you look at that? Let's just tie into that user ID up there. And you know, while we're at it, we'll do our one-to-many relationships as well. So I wonder, can I? No, I can't. So user, well, we know there can only be one user, so that's going to get the one line on that side. But a user can definitely send multiple messages. So we are going to put the crow's foot on the message side there. Okay, and the room ID, well, that's going to come up to our room ID up here. Man, that's messy. Let's drag that line over. Let's connect it. Our room ID, connect it over on this side instead. I'll move this out of the way. Maybe move this in the center just to make it a little prettier. There can be multiple messages in a room. So the many side stays here, but there is only one room that the message can be in. And so we leave the one side here. Sent time, don't worry about, that's not linking up anywhere. And our content, don't worry about, that's not linking up anywhere. So guys, believe it or not, this is your fully completed, fully attributed ERD for our chat room app. Pause for questions.
Yeah. How do you insert rows?
Yeah,
I can't find it where it is.
over on the left sidebar, entity relationship, make sure
Mhm.
that is expanded so you've got
Yes.
stuff underneath it. And
Yes.
then in the third one over in the first row,
Yeah.
it's got a little squiggle that I'm sure says row. If you had
Oh,
Superman
that-
size
That's what you were
vision.
talking about.
So if you hover over that, you can see more clearly that it says row, and then underneath it, it says table row 1.
And
So if you grab that, you can drag it over.
okay.
Latonia, the legend is something that I had up my sleeve. I actually had something on my desktop where I just grabbed it and dragged it over. I can definitely share that in the student resources channel.
That's okay.
Yeah.
It was in the video we watched, and I almost grabbed a screenshot, but I didn't.
Yeah, I don't know where you get those lines and arrows from Crow Street from either.
Yeah, I just sent the PNG file of it in
Oh.
the student resources channel. The good news is you can like download that to your downloads or your desktop and then just drag and drop it right into your diagram and it will appear for you.
So it's not in this utility where you, it
No.
looked like you pulled it magically from within the utility. And I was
Well, I
trying
am magic, so
I know. Thank you.
no, I happened to have that up my sleeve and knew that I wasn't going to be able to complete one of these without actually having the legend. And again, I am probably doing this wrong, and that we should be using the ones, the last 4 on there, because there are definitely relationships where there is one and only one. But the one to many is the most important concept to get down, of like, why is the crow's foot on this side and not on this side, right? And that's because the message is only ever going to be in one room. And so that's why we say, but rooms can have multiple messages. So we put it on this side.
Can you perhaps go over how you did those little arrow thingies? Because I'm having trouble with it.
Yep.
Yeah, I was just gonna say.
Because I don't have a mouse, so it's like really, I keep selecting it and it's not changing when I select and then pick something. And it's
So-
like tiny on your screen how you're doing it.
Yeah, let me see if I can, how well does, kind of blows up pretty well. All right, so if I grab the line here, I should have a couple blue things showing up, which is showing me that I have actually selected the right line. And then over here on the right, there are essentially 6 drop downs that is under that style tag under line. And so what I'm doing is it is this one is the start of the line and this one is the end of the line. And so I'm popping that
Cool.
that drop down and then scrolling all the way to the bottom of it. And there you'll notice the 1 is here, 1 and only 1, and then the many selector is down here at the bottom.
And then what?
And then once you click it, it should update the line to show that.
Oh, okay. I was dragging it over. So that's not, you don't need to do that.
Nope, just click it in the drop down. And then if you click off the line, you'll actually be able to see where it put it.
Okay.
Sometimes it's hard to tell what's at the beginning of the line and what's at the end of the line. So it's easy to say, oh, I would like this to be the 1. And then you realize it's on the wrong side. And then you just use the other drop down to set it like that.
Okay. Yeah, that's obvious. Thanks.
Do we have any other questions? So I'm going to take a 5-minute break now. I'm going to encourage everyone to go to Google Classroom, which I can totally grab the link for. I will share in the chat to review your homework. And the reason I'm giving you 5 minutes is because there's probably 5 minutes of reading to read through the business case and see if anyone has questions, because this homework is a little bit more abstract. And it's not something that you're going to be able to do in 15 minutes. So this is definitely the weekend level assignment. But I do have one more thing for you in class tonight. So I'm going to give everyone 5 minutes to read that assignment, see if there are any questions about the homework. And then if there aren't, we will move on to how do we use our entity relationship diagram to actually make our models.
Hey, so the easiest way to do this would be the same process we did tonight. Start with the Google Doc, move to planning it out, and go from there, right? Okay.
Yep. The assignment doesn't require you to create the Google Doc. So I would use a Google Doc as like a brain dump, right? So like start going through the assignment and just start pulling out things of like, oh, I think I'm going to need that as a table, or like, oh, that's definitely another column that I need to add in there. Or, even if you're not figuring out what the correct table structure is, just pulling apart, hey, someone just brain dumped their entire business on me. I need to pull out the pieces that are helpful to me. And then once I've got that organized in whatever way makes sense in my brain, now I can move on to creating the formal ERD and figuring out what the table relations should be. So you want to make sure in your ERD that you're identifying your primary keys and your foreign keys. But I'm not going to like take off points if you've got your one-to-many relationship wrong, or if you've got some data duplicated or in a different table. I'm going to give you feedback on why I wouldn't do it that way. But the interesting thing with an ERD is there's not a right answer, but there are wrong answers. And so what I mean by that, Ariel, you look so enthused. There are wrong answers in terms of breaking database rules. You can't have many-to-many relationships, right? You never want to store two pieces of the same data in two different tables, right? You don't want to have a username in one table and a username in another table. That's bad. Instead, you should have the user ID in that other table and link to the users table via a primary key, foreign key relationship. One thing, Susan, you mentioned out, how many people are in the room? We never want to store any calculated information in the database, which is another cardinal rule of database design that you would definitely have learned in at least the 8-hour video and in the Stanford class that got pinched out of me fitting it into a 3-hour class. And so the reason why we never want to store calculated information in the database is what happens when a user joins a room. Now, instead of just inserting the row into the users in room table, we also have to go update the rooms table and update the count to add one to it. Well, why would we store that information in the database when we could just run a select count statement that said select the number of people in the room and we're going to get that returned information out? So anything that is calculated, we tend to not store in the database. There are some exceptions on that. If the calculation takes hours and hours to run, okay, maybe we want to talk about storing it so we don't have to run that calculation every time. But for something as simple as, hey, just go count how many people are in this particular room, that's something that we wouldn't store as calculated. So I'm glad you brought that point up.
I have a question, Mrs.
Sure.
Sophia. How fluid are these tables? Like, are we going to look at this content and generally have the core tables be the same, but then people will have different ideas about what secondary tables should be? I mean, what the other tables should be, or does that
Yeah, there are some things that should be jumping out to you right away, like, oh, inventory or service order or technician. Those are all kind of things that like that makes sense. Those are separate data clusters, right? If I had each one of those things as files, it would make sense to put them in different folders. And so you can kind of use that analogy when you start planning out your database, right? Of, all right, where does this naturally make sense to cluster? Where am I going to have multiple of this item? And that is going to be where you start to figure out your tables. And then from there, you can start to figure out, all right, where are my relationships? Are there any many to manys? Do I need to do a bridge table? So I'm not expecting a perfect ERD here because there is no such thing as a perfect ERD here. You are going to come up with different table names than I am going to come up with. That is okay. If you hate my guts for using capital I, capital D, and really want to lowercase that second D, you go for it. You know, it's there are, like I said, things that I will highlight in your ERD of, hey, you're missing this, or heads up, you've got some data duplicated here, or I would have put it over here. I can provide you feedback, but you're not gonna lose points on the assignment, you know, just because you called a table a different name than what I would have called the table.
So the reports at the bottom there that the business owner requires, they're going to do that by joining tables and select queries, right? So that's the guideline for that, is just to think about where to link what primary key to which.
Yes, yes. So spoiler alert, this appliance case is not going to go away, and we're actually going to build this whole mofo. So the only homework for tonight is going to be your entity relationship diagram. And if you fail miserably at it, starting on Monday, we will be using mine anyway. So not the end of the world if you're missing things or something's not where you expect it to be. But we are actually going to start with our entity relationship database, get our database all set up and our models working. And then we're going to jump all the way back to module 2, I think, because module 1 was just onboarding. And we're going to make a wireframe. We're going to figure out what needs to go in that wireframe and see how crazy I go at creating a wireframe and shoving fields in places. And at the very end of it, I will share the first mock-up that I ever made in 2013 that looks like a cat projectile vomited, but it gets the point across that, okay, this mock-up needs to have these screens and get that information out there. So this is all coming back from a class that I took at the iSchool at SU in 2013, I think, information systems and designs. And so we're actually, what I wish the iSchool taught me is how to actually build this whole app. Instead, they taught me in an entire semester how to design the database for this app. It's like, that's great. Now, could you tell me how to build the app? Oh, no, you've got to take 4 other classes, and then we aren't going to connect that all together. You know, oh, we'll teach you back-end programming, and oh, yeah, we'll teach you web design, and oh, we'll teach all of those things, but there's never a class to be like, all right, we're going to use all of those concepts together. And so that's what we're going to do in the boot camp starting next week of let's start connecting the dots here, using our ERD, getting our models figured out, kind of diving in to our front end and figuring out how to truly plan our front end, and then showing that when we have a really well planned out front end, our code is going to be so much easier to create. And then once we got our front end, we've got to go to our back end and get all of our models connected to our back end and create all the endpoints. And then we're going to tie it all together and make it work. And hey, that sounds like a great portfolio project that you guys could share on your personal sites. You're not going to create any SQL queries because we're gonna rely on sqlize to do all of our querying for us. So you don't have to create any SQL queries. You don't have to worry about the create tables or anything like that. We will get to that all next week. But that's not to say that we're not going to use your ERDs. We're just going to use the information in the ERDs to build out your models in sqlize.
Max, is it okay if we just check with you what we want to use for our 9 tables? Just a real quick list of this is what I want to make a table for. And you can say, yep,
Yeah, sure.
in the right direction. Okay, thanks.
Yep, ping me in Slack, and I'm happy to give any feedback as you're working on the assignment. Carolyn, back to your questions. Should date promise be different than date dropped off? What does your gut tell you the answer to that question is?
It should say, should it be on a different line because you have them on the same line? That's the question.
I have them on the same line in the business case.
Yes.
In the business case, I am a naive, non-technical user who knows nothing about databases.
Just look at the list.
Oh, no, I know they're on the same line in the list, but I'm telling you who provided you that list was someone who knows nothing about databases.
Got it. It wasn't you.
No, I'm saying that it is possible that when you get this business list, the business owner is like, oh yeah, it's the date received and the date promised. And yeah, that's one thing. But to you as a programmer, you should be going, but those aren't the same thing. Those are 2 different lines because we can't store 2 values in one column. So those need to be 2 separate columns. So it's a good question. But when you're reading the business use case, I'm not leaving you hints as to how to build the database. I'm doing the opposite. I'm just throwing curveballs at you and going, I'm a user, I run a business. I don't know anything about databases. I don't know anything about application design. Just put something in front of me that can do these things.
I gotcha.
And there are some other curveballs in there of that time to fix estimate before the work is done and the actual time to fix along the same answers of that last one of, well, those are different pieces of information, so they probably need to be handled differently in the database. The user will not be generating any of the SQL queries. We will be building an application that uses sqlize, which generates the SQL queries, which is going to retrieve the data for us. And Carolyn, while you were not to be negative on academia, I clearly have a very negative perception on academia. You would think.
I don't want to offend anyone. That's all.
Yeah, no, it's.
Yeah.
I am happy to hold a debate any day on academia versus the way I learned. And there's a reason I had a job offer before I finished school. And the job offer was not on anything that I was learning in school. It was all the things that I had been self-taught.
Yeah.
So.
No, after I wrote that, I thought, well, I don't want to offend anyone because I'm not really casting. It's just, they are 2 different worlds.
Yeah.
And they have their own thing, and I'm an iSchool grad, so I know what you're talking about. Things are kind of separate, and but I didn't want to be misunderstood. That's all.
No, totally understand.
Yeah. And so as far as the sqlize, I understand that. And this user has all these reports they talk about that they want generated, but later on they want to run a different report. How are they going to do that? Are they gonna call the developer to come in and write it, or?
They are saying we need those reports to be able to come out of our system. And
Right.
so it is up to us as a developer to provide them a way in the interface to be able to generate that report.
So right, but generating future reports that they have not yet anticipated, they would need to be able to do some kind of
No.
query on the database, right?
They would hire a developer to add that report type into the app.
Okay, gotcha. Okay,
We could do we could support them writing a custom query and doing their own report types, but that is often fraught with peril when they run their first delete statement and forget the where. And there
Yeah.
are all kinds of issues you run into with only being able to support selects, and just turns out that having end users write code is not a good idea and is a huge security concern. And so that's when you say, tough shit, hire us and we'll build out that report for
I
you.
gotcha. No, that's what David Link used to say, the user is stupid. He meant, they're not supposed to have to know all this stuff and, so, all right. That gives me a good mindset of how to go into this. Thank you very much.
Perfect. So I am going to create a poll here, I think. Topic go away. Okay, polling. Next steps. Option A, option B. Six votes in, 2 no votes, you cowards. 3 no votes, you cowards. Only 7 votes total. I know I got more than 7 votes, even with the 3 no preference. 2 more minutes before, which I really shouldn't do because it's not tied right now, and I know you guys are going to tie it if I let you guys. Okay, ending the poll and sharing results. Looks like you guys want to get to work on your entity relationship diagrams. So for the 3 that did vote for model out our chat room app, don't worry, we are going to be creating sqlize models for our appliance case. However, that means that we probably won't be doing that until Monday. I am going to try and do a short as possible example on Mongo tomorrow. Without going too far into that. And if I can keep that short and make sure I have covered everything in the syllabus that I was supposed to cover, we can actually get started on the appliance case tomorrow and start building out our models on a finalized ERD, and start thinking through the requirements and building out our rec stock and getting our wireframe going and all of that stuff. But that may get pushed over to Monday, which is completely fine. So tomorrow we're going to do the last true section of the database, which is our Mongo example, talk a little bit about NoSQL, NoSQL, And then we will get back to the appliance case and back to a full stack app. But don't worry, there will be plenty of planning steps before we make it over to our actual creation. You are welcome to drop out of here if you would like to go work in peace. Otherwise, I will be around for the next 14 minutes in case anyone has any diagrams.net questions, or you know me, any questions in general. Hard to shut me up. I will definitely share a screenshot of what I created. Feel free when you turn in your assignment to turn it in whatever file format you want, whether it's a screenshot of it, or you want to submit the actual file, the .draw.io file or the .xml file, whatever it is. That's also fine too. However you want to submit it, I will find a way to open it. I'm going to put that in I'll put that in the student pasted code channel. Carolyn, diagrams.net does not support exporting out the SQL code. Only Lucidchart does that. If you would prefer to use Lucidchart and get that create table SQL code, that's totally fine. Diagrams.net has a lower barrier to entry. You don't have to like create an account and do all of that setup. So that's the only reason why I'm not using Lucidchart, even though they're built on the same framework, the same package. But the other reason why I didn't pick them is because we're going to be building our models in sqlize, and even Lucidchart does not support exporting our ERD in exporting them out as sqlize models. So while we will use our ERD and reference our ERD to create our models, there is no easy export out from either Lucidchart or diagrams right into those model files that are already generated for us.
As I was muted, I just thank you very much. I love to look under the hood. So, sometimes you can see what's going on behind the scenes on the utilities you use, how they're programmed. So thank you.
Kyle, yes, yes, and yes. Each table would have its own model file. Those in the model folders, the model folder files would all be run through db.js. We are going to do our relations in db.js, which is not something that we have covered yet. probably something I should actually cover in this module, but I'm going to push off until next week because we're definitely going to need them in our service app. So yeah, that should, yes, you're totally on the right track, and that's all coming. Karen threw out the 30-second feedback form. Thank you guys for all the feedback last night. Continue to keep that feedback coming, please.
Actually, I have a question about the diagrams website. I've got it saved in my documents folder, but I can't open it because there's no such program. Is that when you would install the
Great question.
desktop version, or is there something else I can open it in?
You can install the desktop version and that would fix it. But if you go to diagrams.net and file open, you should be able to file open from a device. And then once you get it, once you lead the witness, so to speak, and say, hey, I want to open this in diagrams, it should let you pop that file back open. And one thing I want to throw out is we just use the chat room app as our ERD example tonight. We probably won't have the opportunity to actually build it out as the full stack app, just because the appliance case is a little heavier in terms of more to do, shows better relations, all of that kind of stuff. With that said, if we do get through the appliance case and the e-commerce site in the next 2 weeks, which I think would be a miracle, we can definitely come back and build out the chat room app.
One more thing. I see a share button at the top. Is that how we're going to submit this, or are we going to save it and then?
If you
Need a file?
save it and send me the draw.io file in Google Classroom, that will work. If you want to just screenshot it and submit the screenshot, that's fine. There is a file export where you can export it as a PDF or an image file. I work with the diagrams all the time, so it's like I am prepared to open it however you want to send it to me, whatever makes sense to you.
Hey, Max, I have two kind of random questions. This is Latonia.
No, sorry, you hit your question quota for the day. Please come back tomorrow.
When does my time reset? One is, do they use tables for the API? For some reason, APIs popped into my head when we were talking about the different kind of keys. They do? Okay. And then do repair shops usually have a base price they charge? Like just because you walked in the door and want this, appliance fix, we're going to charge you $3 and then we add in the other stuff.
I would say normally you get like a free quote, and then, after the free quote, if you say yes to it, they would have like a base rate that they would charge hourly. but then would be able to give you some kind of estimate of like, oh, yeah, we charge 65 an hour, but we know that this always takes us 2 hours to fix it. So you can anticipate paying $130 or whatever.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right, I am not hearing a ton of questions, so I am going to duck out of here and see you guys all tomorrow. Quick reminder on the 30-second feedback form to fill that out for me.